What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Drummer's Perspective with Ulysses Owens Jr. I'm so excited about this episode today. I have one of the most incredible drummers and artists on the planet that we're getting ready to talk to. So first, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. For those that aren't aware, Open Studio is an incredible resource, digital platform with a lot of great information, great videos, great insight, and really just information around playing jazz. And no matter where you are on the jazz journey, whether you're, an apprentice, whether you just picking it up for the first time, or, you just love the music, this is a great resource for you. And so I'm happy to have this show. And it's really about getting into the minds of wonderful drummers and wonderful artists. So today's artist is an incredible drummer by the name of TERREON GULLY. And I first met TERREON probably about, I have to say probably over maybe 15 years ago. I think probably my first occurrence with him was on some Stephon Harris records, because at the time, growing up in Jacksonville, I started, going to the bookstores and getting a lot of different records. And I remember at that time, Stephon Harris had, a couple of his first records out. And I remember hearing TERREON's playing, and it always kind of struck me as something really unique. However, it wasn't until I think a few years later, maybe into my college years, that I went to Aspen, particularly Jazz Aspen Snowmass, and Christian McBride had his band, which was like the Christian McBride Band, and that band was really like this mixture of sort of like fusion, jazz, and all the players are incredibly versatile. And I remember watching TERREON play, and anybody that's met him, he's like a gentle giant, but I remember watching him playing and being like, this guy has it all. Like, he has the power, he has the finesse, he has the tradition, and then he has this incredibly unique sound. And then as I started to work myself and I started working with McBride, TERREON was always very encouraging to me. And then I started to get to see him play even more. And then I started hearing more recordings. And I just have to say that I think he is one of the really, I think to me, he's the jazz industry's Vinnie Colaiuta, in that he spans this wide versatility of what he can do. He's not just inside as a traditional player. He's not just outside as playing, free. He's not also just a pocket player. Like, he can do it all. And so I'm really excited about today's conversation, because I've copped a lot of stuff from him. Particularly, I love how he tunes the snare drum. So I'm really excited to really geek out with a friend, somebody who's been very, very supportive to me. And he's been in the industry playing with all the greatest for many, many years and producing. So anyway, without further ado, can we please put our, as I like to say, internet fingers together for one of the greatest drummers, I think, on the planet in any genre, and that is Mr. TERREON GULLY.
Yo,
what's up, brother?
What's going on, man?
Hey, man, how you feeling?
I'm feeling real good. Listening to you back there kicking the band like that. I'm like, dang, you can't do nothing but be ready and be happy, swinging hard like that.
Man,
I'm like, that's cool.
Well, man, I've been really excited to talk to you for a while, because, I've had Eric Harlan on here. I've had Nate Smith. I've had a bunch of different cats. And somehow your name always keeps coming up, whether it's gigs that they were on or you were on first. So, man, I just want to open up and just kind of talk about you being from St. Louis and just kind of your background and how you got into the music. And then obviously we'll get into a little bit more of the uniqueness of your drumming journey. But yeah, I mean, who gave you your first pair of drumsticks?
Well, first I got to say from East St. Louis, so I get
excuse me.
Get in trouble. You should know better. You open studio in St. Louis, so you know.
Don't take my St. Louis honorary card from me.
Yeah, man. But my background is like a lot of musicians. I started in church, but I like to put a caveat on it and say I started like pre-Pro Tools church. Where it was like drums, tambourine, and an organ.
Yeah.
and so learning the importance of listening and learning the importance of a vamp, and the emotions of like the speaking and the singing and how the music all works together. So I think that's very important. So I always say that I started pre-Pro Tools church. And then I was fortunate enough just to be in East St. Louis at a time with an incredible teacher in Ron Carter, He had just a high school jazz band in a public school, literally, not figuratively, literally surrounded by 4 different projects, like right in the middle.
Wow.
And he was an incredible instructor who was extremely passionate about what he did. sacrificed everything. You know, we had to do jazz band rehearsal at like 7 in the morning before school started. And then we
What?
didn't get out. You know, we would do jazz band 7 in the morning, do all your classes, and then after that you would have marching band, and then you would have jazz band again at night. And so then after jazz
What?
band, I'm going to either Bible class on Tuesday or choir rehearsal on Wednesday. So it was like all day church. So I did two things. You know, it introduced us to music, but it also kept us out of trouble. You know, because
Wow.
just to survive and make it out of East St. Louis is like a big deal. So I'm
Yeah.
extremely
Wow.
grateful to Ron Carter, you know, and I'm
Wow.
sure a lot of other drummers you might interview, other musicians will tell you like he's a true icon to us, you know, into this
Yeah.
industry and what he's done for jazz.
Wow. And then what about, I mean, with Ron Carter, but he obviously doesn't play drums. So where did your kind of understanding of what to do, especially coming from church? Because I, like you, I love that term, which I'm going to still pre-Pro Tools church. You
Yeah.
know, I grew up that way too. So how did you go from, you know, boom chuck playing grooves to now knowing what to do with ride cymbal beat or, you know, your initial jazz journey?
Great question. So like when I got to high school, I remember I sat in, I couldn't read a lick of music, you know,
Wow.
and I think I sat in on like Cafe Amore or like Chameleon or something. And it's just like listen and play. So it was funkified, you know, so that was
Yeah.
cool for me. But but the thing was, Carter, every morning we would listen to Count Basie or Duke Ellington,
Really?
So like my introduction to jazz was like the Cat, Sonny Payne, Sonny Greer, so like
Mm-hmm.
that was my introduction. And Mr. Carter, he wasn't a drummer, but he knew the importance of the ride cymbal. And he used to be like, man, you got to play through the ride cymbal. I'm like, what do you mean? Like
What?
the concept of play through the ride cymbal. So like not aiming and hitting the top of the ride cymbal, but aiming through and reaching through it. So
Wow.
that gave me a whole nother concept of sound of the ride cymbal. And like
Wow.
that's a part of like how I get my sound on the ride cymbal. But he told us what to listen to, and that was like my introduction to jazz was big band music. So I
Right.
love big band music. I used to cite
Wow.
one of my highlights of my life was in high school. After I finally learned how to read, I ended up doing like this sight reading gig in St. Louis, and Clark Terry was the special guest artist,
Wow.
and I sight read the big band gig in high school. Southern.
Wow.
So like that's something I love to do. I just don't get a chance to do it as much. But along with that big band being introduced to me, and East St. Louis, the radio station that played at WSIE up in Edwardsville, they
Hmm.
jazz. When they played jazz, it was Art Blakey, it
Hmm.
was Duke Ellington, it was Train, but it was Weather Report, it was the Yellow Jackets, it was Spire Gyra, so it was everything. So my ears growing up was like, oh, all this is jazz, which is like a big, it's a big, we have a whole bunch of categories within jazz. So like I grew up, my start to jazz was always listening to a lot of different quote unquote subgenres of jazz,
Interesting.
so that's how I
Wow, man.
started. Yeah.
Yeah. And then what about like, did you ever have a formal drum teacher, or for you, you just kind of just jumped into music and you had Ron Carter?
Yeah. Well, my Ron Carter was my teacher, but
Right.
then my second year in high school, I had the opportunity to go to the United States Eastern Percussion Camp up in Eastern Illinois University that was put on by Johnny Lee Lane.
Wow.
And the reason I went to that camp was because I met this man, Marvin Sparks, who was my mentor. He's like
Mm.
my second father right now. Lives in
Mm.
Houston. But I met him. It's so funny at the District 6, district high school and all
Right.
state and all that. He was the judge for district. And he heard me play, and he's like, man, you got to go to this camp. So I went to this camp, and man, at this camp, Lewis Nash was there one year, and Dugu Chancellor, Ruben Alvarez, Bubba Bryant, um, Tim Adams, the great percussionist from Pittsburgh.
Wow.
So it was all these different disciplines in percussion. Like I had no idea, so that thing was a very unique. It lasted for like a week. So like you would have a drum set class with like 15 drum sets set up. Or then you would go to a Latin percussion class and it's like 20 sets of conga set up. And then you would go to concert
Wow.
snare, marimba, timpani, so like that was school for like a week, every day going to these different classes and
Wow.
being introduced to the world of percussion. So that really was a life-changing experience for me because I was like, oh, wow, especially me, somebody like Chancellor who played on like all the Michael Jackson records. I was like, oh my
Right,
God,
right.
man, so we can make money playing drums and beating on stuff. So I was like,
Wow.
so that changed my concept. So I was fortunate. So I never had a private lesson until I got to college,
Hmm.
and how I got to college was like, through Carter, we used to have all these different schools to come, because the band was pretty
Mm-hmm.
good. So I had scholarship to Berkeley,
Mm-hmm.
Bethune-Cookman, Jackson State, a
Yeah.
bunch of different schools. And I actually had housing for a bunch of them, but I had no idea where I was going. And
Mm-hmm.
then one day, I never forget it was like after Bible class, and my mother's like, okay, you going to the University of Houston, you leave like in 2 weeks. I was like, all right. So it was just like that. But it's like Sparks had got the job as a professor at the University of Houston. He was taking me down as a student. And
Yeah.
that was like how I got to University of Houston. And he was like my first quote unquote drum teacher. And a
Wow.
good thing about Sparks, he just he introduced me to so much,
Mm-hmm.
exposed me to like percussion conferences and took us
Mm-hmm.
to musicals. Like I remember he took us to Oba Oba, which was this
Mm-hmm.
Brazilian musical that came to Houston. And I was like, whoa,
Wow.
the music, the women, it was just like so powerful,
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
so like then he went to Cuba and brought back tapes that he made with
Wow.
transcriptions and had brought back real cajones. So we actually played cajones. So
Okay.
he really helped me to be a versatile musician and getting to the authentic roots of everything. So that
Man,
was
man.
that was basically it.
But so that's interesting because I think when I first met you, I thought you were from Houston,
Mhm.
but now hearing your journey through there is interesting. But I want to go back to where you talked about big band because I feel like you're one of those like really modern drummers. Like when people
Mhm.
think about kind of the canon of modern drummers, you're one of
Mhm.
them in jazz. And I think that to me, people would never think that you played big band music. And
Mhm.
so obviously you play with Monchestra, John
Mhm.
Beasley. But can you talk a little bit about like what did you learn, like what did you learn from like Sonny Payne that was also with you when you were playing with Stefan and y'all playing all this superimposed stuff? Like, because I feel like for me, I didn't even know that that was part of your journey. So, what has
Mhm.
stayed true to you that you learned from listening to that stuff every day?
Oh man, like I was from the very beginning, like just in my musical journey, I've always been more interested in like subtle stuff in the music, in the music, like stuff that make you go like, oh dang, what was that?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
not this, I'm never been about flashy. I'm not as like a
Yeah.
flashy person at all. That's not me. So like Sonny Payne used to do like these incredible fills,
Yep.
like he would do a big fill and set up the band, but he wouldn't hit the cymbal. He wouldn't end on the cymbal. I was like, oh, like that was slick. I never heard it like that before.
Yeah. Yeah.
So but just like the concept of like controlling the band and playing with dynamics and driving and setting up and like how, like dynamically how you can make the band drop way down and like if you super pianissimo, they gotta come down. So like
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
just like all those little subtle things I really
Okay.
try to do and try to keep going with the music.
Yeah. Yeah. Which I
And then
definitely. Oh, sorry. No, after you.
now go ahead. And so like with like or for example with Ellington, how he wrote specifically, for the musicians in the band,
Mm-hmm.
so like even when I think for soloing wise and playing with different solos,
Yeah.
the way I comp with Casey may be different from the way I comp with Mark
Yeah.
or Stefan, and that's a
Mm-hmm.
subtle thing that a lot of drummers don't think about. It's just like the same thing all the time. But I think this is like in a conversation, people have different rhythms. So the way you respond and when you get a chance to respond should be different. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
if we comp in the same way all the time, that's like one that gets to the ear and it's like the same thing. But if you change the way you comp with the musicians that you solo that are
Mm-hmm.
soloing, it's going to be a whole nother conversation. So
Yeah. No,
that's
that
just
makes
one of
sense.
the smaller things.
No, I love that. And man, I want to, before we get into the career stuff, because you've had such an incredible career and you continue to have one, I got to talk to you about drum setup because I feel like for jazz, you have a really unique setup. And I've been watching yours for a while, and I
Mm,
feel like, a lot of us either have done like the 4-piece thing or you have a couple cats that have done like the 5-piece thing. But to me, with yours, one, you've had multiple times, but just the tuning. So, like, who taught you like how to tune? Because I feel like there's like the way most of us like
mm,
tune, and then there's like Terreon.
mm,
Like, and the thing about yours is like it's unique, but it works for all the other stuff. So, can you maybe
mm.
talk about drum setup and tuning approach?
Yeah, like right now I'm looking at all these different drums and cymbals,
Yeah.
And for me, it's two things. I always want to come from a place of authenticity, you know.
Mm.
And for me, that's like the most important thing: authenticity, creativity, you know. And that's been part of my sound. But one thing, when I started playing with different people who like to play different styles of music, it was like, man, how can I try to be as authentic as possible and true to the genre, but also give what we need for each other, each song. You know, Diane, we doing all kind with Diane. She
Mm-hmm.
goes anywhere
Right.
at any time. You know,
Right.
so
Right.
you know it's hard to trying to go deep Afro-Cuban with a
Right.
16-inch bass drum that's ringing. You know what I mean?
Right.
And
Right.
then you know, and if we're going into better days, I can't have you know the ringing 12 like I would if it was just a straight ahead gig. You know, so
Right.
like
Right.
I have to have the discipline and the concept of like if she called a fast up bebop tune, you know, I got my snare drum and my ride cymbal. You know, depending on the setup at the time, I may not hit another time because it's not tuned for that. But like the ride cymbal and the snare drum and the hi-hat, that's it. That's all you might get on that song because it's
Mm-hmm.
tuned for that. You know,
Wow. Okay.
so like with Christian for Vertical Vision and the stuff we did with the Christian McBride band at that time, I knew I was deep into like Bob Marley, you know, and
Wow.
electronica dance music or garage, you know.
Wow.
And my concept was like I wanted my drums to sound like what I heard on the radio for certain things, you know. So like the people talk about like I would have this for in the beginning with Christian, I used to have like this really high 8-inch tom and like
Yeah, I remember.
a deep 15, you know.
Yeah, I remember that.
And the reason was like, you know, sonically, I used to record myself and hear how stuff sound within the music. And I found that the 8, you know, if you have the 8 tune just right, you know, with that low floor time, you don't want to get in the way of the bass, but also you want it to cut through. So I had to tune it in a
Mm.
way where it didn't get in the way of his lower register, but I
Mm-hmm.
wanted the 8 to actually cut through. So like I just
Mm-hmm.
have 8 and 15. But when I hit the 8, it slung through the music. And then with somebody like Joe Furler, the engineer, you know, Joe,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you work with Joe a million times. So
Yeah.
like, you know how he had the drums singing on that. So like
Yeah.
same with the Blackout records. He did the early Blackout records too.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he did the very first one, you know.
Wow. No, that makes sense, man. Because I remember seeing y'all live with Christian. I remember seeing your setup, so that makes sense in terms of the tuning. What about because I'm a drum nerd. What about your drum journey in terms of Premiere? And then are you with Yamaha now? Like who are you
Yamaha.
playing? Okay,
Yamaha.
so can you maybe talk a little bit about like that transition from sort of Premiere? And I don't know if you were maybe with anybody else, but kind of the different things that you got out of
Mhm.
playing those different drums.
I first, well, I started my drum journey here in Atlanta, Georgia, where Flowery Branch, Georgia, was a drum designer, drum maker named Kevin Pinson, who
Oh
created
wow,
these drums called Baron Ayers drums. You know, so I was one of his
wow.
first endorsers, and I was really interested in the warmness of the wood hoop drums. You know, so
Oh yeah.
he made me. I still have it to this day, and I still play it every day. There's a 16-inch bass drum,
Mm.
12, and a 13 with a 13-inch snare, but all wood hoops. And I've recorded on it a couple of times, but like I started with him, but then he built me this other big kit, and actually this was cool because I would go to his house and actually build it too, you know. So I helped sand the
Wow.
drums, help shape the bearing edge, you know, paint it, you know. So we kept doing coats to get the color I wanted, you know. So I mixed the color. So like my drum set, and I think I had enough paint, and somebody else made one other drum set with this particular like crazy lime green color,
Hmm.
you know. So I learned a lot from just, you know, actually knowing about the drums from him. And then
Wow.
after that, this is another Christian story. We were playing in Frankfurt, a double bill with it was a duo, not Gary, yeah, Gary Burton and Makoto Ozone
Oh yeah,
with the
yeah,
Christian McBride band. So we was playing that like this, like really like concert hall that reverb like crazy. It was like
yeah.
ridiculous. So they played, and I'm not exaggerating. We played, and after like the first song, like half of the audience left because it was so because you know at that time we was like Technicolor
Yeah.
Nightmare.
Yeah,
We was
y'all
going
hitting.
in, and Christian. I playing with him for
Yeah.
many years. He don't care. He gonna do what he
Yeah.
gonna do. He can do
Right.
everything, but he's gonna do what he gonna do and
Yeah.
commit to it. But the people who stayed came down to the front of the audience, and it was a killing concert. So anyway, at that concert or that sound check, we found out that the Frankfurt NAMM show was the big Frankfurt music show was like, a few blocks away. So I convinced Blake to come with me. It's like, man, let's go over to this Frankfurt thing. And we went and like talked our way in somehow. And then
Yeah.
I saw some people that I knew. And one of them was this guy, Ian Crofty, who was at the time the head over Sonar.
Oh
And
wow.
Colin Schofield, who at the time
Oh yeah.
was working. He's actually one of the people that started Dennis with doing clinics based Zildjian like way back in the day. And Colin is a huge music fan. He knows all about all the drummers and music. He's an
Mm-hmm.
incredible guy. But
Mm-hmm.
anyway, Ian Crofty had I did a code contract. He gave me a contract to be a Sonar endorser.
Okay.
And they gave me a bunch of T-shirts, and I was filling out the thing to order my drums, and like I had ordered this, and at the time it was only pretty much, I think it was Cindy Blackman Tang and Louis Nash were like the only,
Wow.
only people of color with Sonar back
Yeah.
then. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And there was definitely no young cats with them. So I was like all geeked and was about to be on with Sonar. And Colin was like, man, I can't say why right now, but if you can hold off before you sign the Sonar contract, I might have something, have something for you. So basically, long story short, ends up Ian was leaving Sonar to start his own drum magazine, and Colin was still at Premier. And I know, about endorsements that, it's all about relationships. And
Absolutely.
I was scared to be in a company with nobody I didn't know and didn't know who I was and
Mm-hmm.
didn't know what value I had. And Colin knew already he knew all the different things I was playing on. So that's how I got
Mm-hmm.
to Premier. And I was with them for many years. And the
Yeah.
problem with Premier was there was no distribution, and it was like you couldn't
Absolutely.
get access to drums. I think I
Yeah.
only had them pretty much in the UK and in Japan, because Japan, I love Japan.
Yeah.
They
They
go
get
out the
whatever.
way. They found
Yeah.
a Premier drum somewhere.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
but like 99% of the time I was playing Yamaha. So naturally, like before, Joe Testa and some other people at Yamaha had asked me to join Yamaha years ago. And I was like, at that time, I was like, man, I just didn't want to be, a little fish in like the big ocean of Yamaha,
Yeah. There's a lot of cats there.
but like now, Greg and Prudence over at Yamaha are taking good care of me. So
Good.
it worked out how it should. Yeah.
No, man, that's great, and I think that's really important for our audience and for drummers to kind of see the journey, because I've had like Peter Erskine on here and other cats who as they switched different drum companies, you saw their sound change, but you also
Mhm.
saw different career changes as well that kind of accompanied what drums they were playing.
Mhm.
But man, I want to kind of dive into your career, and before we start talking about the specifics of it, can you maybe tell me, for our audience, like what are maybe three things you think about that are helpful as like a side man? Like if the average cat that's watching this is saying, hey, I want to be able to have a similar journey to TERREON in that he's played with so many people that like to play with him. What would you boil down to, like maybe three things that you've helped with in terms of your philosophy to like be a cat that a lot of people like to work with and like to call and hire for recordings and what have you?
Man, the first thing is be prepared, be professional, and be appreciative.
Wow.
You know, it's a billion drummers. Like I tell people, like you can go grab somebody off the street and he can out chop me any day, but like you're not gonna make as much music as I'm gonna make. I'm just gonna say it like
Yes.
that.
Yes.
So like I listen, I make music, and my goal when I play with anybody is to give them what it is they need, try to make them feel comfortable with what they're used to having, but also to bring in a little bit who I am, in the situation,
No, I
and
love that, man.
yeah, that's the main thing.
Yeah. No, I love that. And then so I'll just go through a few of the different bands we talked about and kind of what I'd love to know, like your journey of playing with the band, and then like how did you get adjusted to playing with the band? So for instance, Stefan Harris, and for those that may not know, Stephon Harris is an incredible composer, band leader, vibraphonist. How did you get into that band? And then was there anything Stephon specifically said to you about how to play his music? And same thing for Christian. And I'd definitely love to know that for John Beasley, because I've,
Mm,
played with John a little bit, subbing for you at times. So
mm,
it'd be great to know kind of, and honestly, any other bands, because I know there's so much other music you've made that
mm.
I may not even be aware of.
Yeah, well, those three specific is all definitely three unique different stories. With Stefan, we first played a gig randomly. We met, I think he said we met at the Monterey Festival when somebody introduced us. And then he shortly called me after, was like, man, I got a gig in DC. Can you do it? And we did it. And the first hit, go to the stage and hit it. And we had a good connection.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I started playing with his quartet. And then he had like one song, like some song he had. And he's like, man, you should play this pattern. And I was like, you sure? I was like, all right. And then I played it. And then after that, he's like, nah, play what you want. And then after that, he's like, man, I never tell you what to play again, So like, he'll tell you that like, especially, so like that was like with the quartet. But when Blackout happened, it's very unique because with Blackout, it's basically consisted of a bunch of musicians I had played with already.
Okay.
I played at Casey's senior recital.
Wow.
Me and Mark Carey was playing together with Abby Lincoln, and I and
Oh, I
Roy
didn't know
Hart.
that.
Yeah, like Abby Lincoln was one of the first people I played with when I moved to New
Oh,
York.
wow. I didn't realize that. Okay.
And him, and Roy Hargrove used to chill at his house all the time and just do all these random recordings. And Marcus putting them out now. And
Really? Wow.
yeah, and then Darrell Hall, who was the first Monk
Yeah.
competition winner for bass,
Yep.
I played on his record, and I used to do gigs all over New York all the time. So the band, this particular band, but the unique thing about all those musicians is that they all love all kind of music and can play all kind of music.
Mm.
So Blackout was formed with all of us, and it was about like playing the music of now, playing the music of the past, but with like a Blackout spin on it. So all the music is it's like a mixture of all the things that we all grew up listening to, but also trying to be true to the art form, but also moving it forward.
Wow.
And so might have a concept of what he might want to, but he don't tell me when to play. But he say now it's hard to have drummers to sub, because like drummers just play their thing.
Right.
But if you listen to the Blackout records, it's like some of the rhythms I play or grooves is like integral parts of the songs now.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So like, and that happens a lot with artists, with composing and stuff. They get used to a certain sound and certain things that happen. So that was that with Blackout. With Christian, how Christian is. He's like, man, he's like, go for it, because he can do everything, So like, the funny story about Christian, I was just telling somebody the other day, when I first started playing with Christian in the band, I never forget, we did like one gig in Aspen before it wasn't a camp, it was just something else.
Yeah.
It's like, but we just playing funk. But then we finally did the first gig with the actual Christian McBride band. I never forget, it was in Toronto, and we had all day to chill out. I'm like, man, what we gonna play? He's like, oh, we're gonna play some tunes. I'm like, oh, cool. So we chilling all day, hanging out, changing to our suits and whatever at the festival. So, we headlined, so we about to go on stage, and Christian handed me this book of music. I'm like, oh,
what?
we got music. I'm like, all right, cool. So the first tune he calls is Volume Wandishi. And if you don't know that tune, it's like some song in like 15/8, tribute to Herbie's band. And it's like, I was like, man, if I didn't know how to read, I would be, ooh. But
so hold up. Y'all didn't have, hold on, TERREON. Y'all didn't have a rehearsal.
We didn't have no rehearsal. It was just like, here's
That's
the
classic.
book.
That's classic McBride.
Here's the book. Volume Wandishi. I was like, oh, dang. So cats learn how to read music out there,
Dang, man. Well, I'm just surprised he had a book.
Exactly. Shoot, man, when we recorded Vertical Vision, literally he was writing music in the studio. So if you listen
Really?
and we had never heard any of that stuff. So that's why I like that record a lot. Like, it's raw. I think most of the songs were possibly first take, if not all of them. And the only song that they had played before was Precious something, one of Keezer's tune. that they did as a trio with no drums like a while ago. But other than that, all the songs were originals that Christian had written, and some of them he had finished writing in the studio. So we had never rehearsed it, never played it, and like most of it was first takes. If you go back and listen to that record, you might hear some stuff like, "Oh, okay," but it's like I love that about Christian because he's such a professional. But like he's been out here, so he know.
Yeah, and I think to your point too, like there's something about him, and I, I've kind of started doing the same thing with my bands. Is like there's something about him that trusts who he puts in the band, right? Like because the same when he called me to sub for him, or when we started the trio, it was this thing of like I'm not about to sit up here and write 50 arrangements. Like we're gonna build something as a band, but I also trust the musician in you. So that's very. But it's interesting to me because our stuff was much more straight ahead. Y'all stuff has so many different spins and stuff to it. So to hear that that y'all didn't really rehearse is crazy.
Oh no,
yeah,
went straight in. And with Beasley, man, I met Beasley many years ago at this all-star jam camp that I was doing. So it was just like musicians from all different genres in Utah, in Ogden, Utah, and we just became friends. And I knew who he was because he played on one of my favorite all-time records, which is John Patitucci's On the Corner. That's how I discovered who John Beasley was. But he also played with Miles and many other people also.
Right.
And then we connected back, many years later. Actually, I think the first time we reconnected was on Queen Latifah's gig. He was the music director for Queen Latifah.
Yeah. Okay.
And I did some gigs with him with that. And then what ended up happening with the Monkestra, they had recorded like some of the first album, and then Gary Novak had did it. And then some reason he didn't want to do the rest of it, and they asked me to fly out and finish it. Wow. And that was it, That's been it. So I've done the last few.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think when I heard you with that band, that was one of the first times I heard like a unique big band drummer. Because it was like you catching all the stuff, but like you throwing all these killing grooves on it, and this I don't. What's that splash? It's like a really it's like a small sizzle cymbal or something you use.
That's a Will Calhoun Alien disc that I got as soon as it came out like many years ago.
Yeah, it's so weird.
Yeah,
but and you would hear all that in the mix. So that was an education for me as well. The other thing, obviously, we have to talk about the Queen. Diane. I'd love for you to explain to the audience how do you approach this singer's gig, but you are still who you are? Because I've seen you, with obviously the Open Studio founder Peter Martin. But you bring you to that band, I've seen y'all live a bunch. So can you talk a little bit about, what is it like playing with Diane Reeves?
Man, playing with Diane is like a dream, Anybody who knows her and knows her music, man, she can literally do any and everything. And on her gig, that's what it requires, doing everything. I remember early 90s and seeing this BET video of the commercial for Bet on Jazz.
Yeah.
Platinum Peter Martin.
Right.
And they were doing Afro Blue, and it was just like I had never seen a singer like within a band like that. It was like they were all one. It wasn't like a band behind and then a singer. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's her approach. So, and you got to give it to her. She don't.
Yep.
You can't be not listening. And I think a lot of times, us as musicians, which was a very surprising. When I first moved to New York, I would play with different people, a lot of singers and other musicians, and they would be like, "Man, we can't believe it. You listen." I'm like, "Everybody listening," and then I quickly find out that was not the case.
Yeah.
So even to this day, like, man, some of my favorite musicians who I like to play with are because they listen.
Yeah.
It's a big thing for me. So with Diane, you got to be able to listen, and you got to be able to go anywhere. A lot of times, man, gigs we would just make up stuff. She would start singing,
exactly.
So you got to have a killing bass player like Reginald Ville, Ruben Rogers, James Jennings, Christian, cats who can hear where she's at and go where she want to go.
Yeah.
So that's a very unique situation because a lot of people aren't courageous like that to be able to go anywhere, you know.
Yeah.
And so because she's that, the musicians have to be able to do that, and we do, you know. So
Yeah, no, it's funny. I played with her one time. McBride had set something out like a up rather in Aspen, and she was like, he had like 10 cats, and she was one of them, and she played with us, and it was crazy because it was like a big band scenario, and I remember, she got to something maybe Latin, and you know how she is. She starts
yeah,
dancing,
dancing and
whatever,
singing,
and
yeah.
I guess I wasn't in that one moment, like I wasn't giving it to her, and she looked back at me, she was like, "Come on, baby,"
Yeah,
like, you
exactly,
know, and
exactly.
so it was really deep to see,
Yeah.
like a singer like single handedly bring me the, and then of course I got in there, and she, and at the end she loved it, and I think you couldn't do a gig or something, and they called me to sub, and she said to Peter, she's like, make sure he brings it now, so it
Oh,
was, it was
yeah,
very cool to
yeah.
hear, because I'm thinking, I played with a bunch of singers,
Mm,
but it was more of that, like, brushes, like sort
mm,
of Jimmy Scott vibe,
yeah.
but her thing was like, don't treat me like that. Give me
Mm,
what you give the cats. But I also wanted to talk, Terry, a little bit before I let you go. I want to talk about, you have maintained a presence in Atlanta, Georgia. You were in New York. You
mm.
were talking about for a period of time, but how have you maintained this status of who you are musically and still being relevant on the scene, but not choosing to like live on the scene? Can you maybe talk a little bit about that? Because I know now that's kind of been a question for a lot of people, especially since the pandemic.
Oh yeah.
Like I don't live in New York solely anymore. Like I split
Mm,
my time. So can you talk about maybe that and the inspiration, or how you stay inspired and all of that?
mm. For me, inspiration, man. I like around the corner. I got stacks and stacks of CDs, and then on my
Yeah,
computer, like
yeah,
it's so much music, you know, and like
yeah.
all the cats coming up playing all this new stuff. So the inspiration is there. But far as New York is concerned, I left because I mean I was always traveling, I was touring, I was subletting. I actually got to the point where I was actually subletting my bedroom because I was gone so much. And I never forget, I was on tour in Europe somewhere, and my landlord called, was like, "Man, you can stay, but the rent's going to be like three times as much," you know. But
Wow.
I had already built a house in Atlanta, you know. I was already
Hmm.
out, and but far as New York, I tell people, especially up and coming musicians, like there's no place like it in the world as far as becoming a musician and like going
Hmm.
and being around just a whole bunch of cats that can play, you know,
Hmm.
and who are doing it and hustling. And I think it's just good for you as a musician to get a chance to experience something like that. But
Hmm.
because the world is small and has been getting smaller for the last decade or two,
Yeah.
you know, I think you can live anywhere, you know. And I
Hmm.
tell people like you don't have to you don't have to be in New York, but it helps, you know. So I tell
Hmm.
people
Hmm.
like if you want to be one of the baddest street ballers in the world, what are you gonna do? You got to go and play up at New York. You got to go to the
Yeah.
beaches of LA. You got to go to
Yeah.
Chicago. You got to go
Yeah.
come to Atlanta and go to the run and shoot when it exists, where people
Yeah.
just ball all day, you know.
Yeah.
And that's how you
Yeah.
get your skills up. So that's the
Yeah.
same thing for if you want to be, not that you have to, but it makes the process easier and you can learn and get a lot of much more
Right.
if you're in
Right.
more a place where there are a lot of musicians. So I always recommend going to New York, even if New York is not for everybody because it's a different kind
Right.
of living. You're a
Absolutely.
Florida boy. Florida is totally different from New York.
And
And
we
like,
off the chain right now.
I know I saw the news today with the school board people arguing because they trying to protect their kids to wear masks. I was like, oh Lord, what's
Yeah,
going
bro.
on? Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like,
No, that's.
the world is so small, man. Like we go to
Hmm.
Australia or in the middle of, Ukraine, and it's like people sounding like Charlie Parker and playing all this stuff.
Hmm.
But the
Hmm.
thing is, like, I think it's like a curse and a blessing, with the globalization of music. You
Hmm.
know, like one reason I used to love to go out of town and go to Europe was to listen to the radio and hear the music of where I was.
Hmm.
Now it's the same music all over the world, so it's
Absolutely.
like
Yeah.
what's the point, so
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And then, I would love to know, man, a couple of things like, what are what's coming up for you? You're excited about, especially now that the world's opening up. And then also, what would you say was maybe some of the best advice, whether it's from a musician, but about being in the music and being on the scene?
Hmm. I wouldn't say advice, but this was a lesson. When I was in the Disney All American College Band, we had the opportunity to go to the Tonight Show when Branford was the band leader,
Wow.
and man, they had Branford come and talk to us, in the band hall. But we also went to the show, and after the show, we backstage, and I got a chance to meet all the cats, and I met Jeff Watts, and man, Jeff is the coolest dude on the planet.
Yeah.
He's like, yeah, man, come over to the house. Invited me over to the crib. So the bass player in the band was the only guy that had a car. Yeah, he had a car. So man, he had a convertible like hot red Mustang. And man,
Wow.
he took me from the Disney from my apartments over to Tang house. And at the time, Tang was staying in a duplex. He had one side and Kenny Kirkland had the other side. And so the day I got over there, it was like all these super killing Lexuses in the driveway. So Sal, the trumpet player in the band, had convinced all of them that they should get a Lexus. So Kenny had a Lexus, Tang had a Lexus. So I never forget. I got there, professional. The motto at the percussion camp was to be early is to be on time. So that's still my
Yeah.
motto to this day.
Yeah.
So I showed up a few minutes early, knocking on the door. Nothing. Knocked on the door. Nothing. Knocked on the door. Nothing. Call. Nothing. Man, so me and my boy left, came back, knocked on the door, and then finding this beautiful, gorgeous woman come to the door, like, hold on. So then Tane came back out. I don't know if we can curse him, but he's like, all right, MF, let's go. And man, we literally just sat there and played for some hours, and that's how
Wow.
not now, man, that's like one of my closest friends. And I used to always call him and ask, just check in with him to see what was going on. And, and I think, man, if I'm correct, I think he might be the one who recommended me to Christian McBride.
Really? That makes
Yeah,
sense.
I think I
Wow.
saw him at the Vanguard, and he's like, "Man, I think Christian is looking for a drummer. I'm gonna hit you up." And
Okay.
I think that's what happened. And the crazy thing about that, I think the first time I spoke to Christian, I never forgot. I was at North Sea Jazz Festival, and just happened to be, North Sea, like the old one
Yeah.
was a
Yeah.
hang, and I just happened to be in the room, and I get a phone call, and it's Christian. Call him like, "How you know
Wow.
where I'm at in the hotel? Like, how did he know?" I'm like, man, like, yeah, but that's like
Wow, man.
all the dots connected. But the point I get to Tane is talking to Tane, I asked him, like, man, how did you, get into jazz and how did you learn how to play? He's like, he studied classical percussion and
Hmm.
classical music. Man, he's like, man, listen, you got to listen. And he wrote down like 4 albums with the artist, the
Hmm.
drummer, the record label, and the year.
Hmm.
I was like, I can't do that to one album, you know?
Hmm.
So I was like, man, that's a whole nother level of listening. So
Hmm.
that particular summer, being in the college band, I was had roommates from North Texas, the New School, and
Hmm.
Berkeley, different all instrumentalists. And what we did that whole time was play poker and listen to each other's CDs collections. And
Wow.
these
Yep.
guys, so like we playing poker, and all of a sudden they all singing this same solo. I'm like, how they know this solo? So they singing
Yeah.
along with the
Yeah.
solo. I'm
Yeah.
like, crap. So this is what
Yeah.
we did. Like I didn't play drums at all. Like, I think I played drums for like 10 minutes on a sit down drum set,
Hmm.
while we marched in Disney. So that wasn't that whole summer. That's all I did was listen and play poker. So get
Wow.
back to the University of Houston and start playing. And everybody's tripping on how good my playing is, like, dang,
Hmm.
what have you been doing? But it's
Right.
not that I was practicing it. It was just I was listening with another intent,
Yeah.
another level of listening. So from
Right.
that point
Right.
on, I changed. I
Hmm.
listened differently, So
Yeah.
no matter if it was Enrique Pla with Los Von Von, or if it
Hmm.
was no matter who, if it was Giovanni
Right. Right.
or Negro or
Hmm.
Louis Nash or Mulgrew. When I
Right.
listen, I listen totally different. So depending on whether it was drum and bass, two step,
Hmm.
reggae, I listen with intent now. So like
Yeah.
I would play Madden football and turn the sign off and only have the
Yeah.
music on that I was checking out at the time. And
Beautiful.
that was the most important lesson for me was listening and learning how to listen, you know. And
Yeah,
that's one of the
yeah,
songs we used to do with Abby Lincoln. You got to learn how to listen. And
yeah,
unfortunately, most musicians don't listen, you know. And I
yeah.
think that's a big lesson for me.
Cool, man. Well, man, I appreciate you so much, TERREON. I continue to learn a lot from you, and I think we have some music we're going to end with. Right? Did you give Rachel something?
Hi, I'm Greg Spiro, and you're watching Tiny Room, brought to you by Quincy Jones and Quest TV. For our fourth episode featuring TERREON GULLY, aka Tank, we bring you a very special world premiere of his original called Tanktified.